everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we have Ina Gikandi here, who is the Director of Executive Education and Coaching at George Washington University Center for Excellence in Public Leadership. So welcome.
Thank you, CJ. Really excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to have you here. We're talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is conscious leadership, and it's something that's kind of a new idea that I'm thrilled to hear is becoming more popular. So let me make sure that I first start with terms. Conscious leadership.
Sure.
What does that first mean?
Well, I will say it gets tricky. In fact, when we started this program, we wanted to stay away around the idea of conscious, and we called it eco-leadership. Mm-hmm. But I would say that if we want to define conscious, I would say it's leadership with clear intention. Mm-hmm. That's how I would define it. And then if we move into the term of eco-leadership, which ultimately the way we're speaking to conscious leadership, it's really about co-creating in movement. E is about expansion and it's about energy, and the co is about the co-creation. It's how do we get to see each other in this system in a way that we expand and contract and we build the rhythm. You know, when we breathe and expand, we take it in, we take it out, we release it out. It's about expansion and contraction, and we want to be in the rhythm. So building this flow, creating this flow, it's so important to our humanity, especially in the times we're living. So how can we cultivate a little bit more of that flow? And that really became our question as we saw us work with leaders in the various organizations, particularly government organizations. How can we cultivate a little bit more presence, a little bit more choice in the lives of these leaders?
Okay, so this was based on some observations that you saw, or from the request of the employees, or both?
Well, it starts with the inner journey. I think as it does, the more we become aware, and it started with a little bit my journey, a little bit with the journey of the people who I work with. The more I became aware of my own resilience, my own questions, the more people around me became aware. So that was interesting. It had a ripple effect. But also I would say I joined myself a coaching program, and that was sort of the beginning of my journey. Mm-hmm. And through this coaching program, there was a really important component that was around somatics, which is really learning through your body, being aware of that intelligence, which is the body. And I got really fascinated because I said, how can I not? I had no sense of it. I had spent my time into this thinking, the intellectual, the cognitive, but very little into my own sensing. So I said, this is interesting and unique. We should bring more of this into our own programming. So we started experimenting with that, and we brought in a model called leadership embodiment that came out of a woman named Wendy Palmer. She was an Aikido teacher, and she created this model for leadership. And we put it to action with some of our clients, government, mid-level leaders, senior leaders. And it was the fundamental practice was the practice of centering, uplifting, exhaling down the front, softening your chest, and then think of someone or something that makes you smile, and how Wendy calls it as the cocktail, the amazing cocktail that boosts our adrenaline, lowers cortisol, and releases oxytocin. So the more we started doing this, the more people started connecting at a deeper level with one another. And we would hear, we would work with one agency, and we do a lot of work with DC government in particular, and local government. We would hear from one agency, and then another agency would come, can you do that training with us? What is that? We want the centering practice. We're hearing about the centering practice.
Mm.
So from there, we started doing more training in that space, but then we also incorporated coaching in our program, which was not something we did before. And that created a whole new opening for people. The results that we were getting through our programs were tremendous. And these, we would hear when they would share their journey at the end, how for some people, they started telling their story. They started really speaking up. They started understanding that I am a full person. I'm a whole person. And as I enter the space and the door of my office, I don't need to leave my personal life behind.
Mm.
There are some boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I can bring my whole self to the
Mm.
workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how it started for us. And the more we saw the need for this awakening in awareness and consciousness, the desire, we said, well, let's be a little more intentional. Maybe we do offer a program that has a little bit more meat and tools to offer to leaders who want to lead with intent, with greater intention, with more clarity. And hence this new program that we've put together.
Okay, so I have like a bajillion questions off of that.
Okay, sure, yes.
Okay, so you started with going to the government and the leaders like, I want some more of that centering thing, whatever that thing is. And what were they seeing when people, and I just want to review, as I understand, when you're saying centering, it's having a somatic, a body-oriented experience where they're breathing, and I don't know if you're having them center in their heart or in their lower chakras near their stomach, but having them center and breathing in and just focusing their energy on the center. So what is a centering practice? Can you step us through it?
We
Yeah.
can do it together
Yeah,
if
let's do
you
it together.
wish.
So
Let's do
yeah,
it
let's do it
together because
together. Sure.
it's easy.
Yeah.
So we just plant our feet nice in the ground. We can put our hands to the side, nice and straight our spine in the chair. You can sit in front of the chair or all the way back, whatever it's comfortable. And we try to keep our eyes sort of gazing down because we want to be able to do this in awake life. And then we inhale up the spine. Exhale down the front, soften our chest, and think of someone or something that makes you smile. We'll do that another time. Inhale up the spine, exhale down the front, soften your chest, and think of someone or something that makes you smile. This is the basic centering practice.
Okay.
An opportunity to uplift so that we can put ourselves into that big picture thinking, opening our thinking, our way of vision. And as our hands are to the side in a way that we feel more inclusive of others around us, our feet are nice and grounded so that we have that nice connection to earth. And as we exhale down the front and we soften our chest, we're softening our heart, we're opening our heart. And then there's an element of joy. Think of someone or something that makes you smile, and that joy activates oxytocin, which is the connecting hormone or the hugging hormone. I always think of my son when I think of the joy and that presence. And it creates it's an interruption that helps us reconnect with ourselves pretty quickly. This is a foundational practice, and this could be the only practice. But there are other practices, and this could be around coaching, depending on things you want to start observing differently. Like one of the things when I explain to leaders how in this whole person approach to leadership, we're starting to change behaviors is first by noticing our own behavior, starting to observe our own behavior. And to observe, we need to come to this centering and silence. And people do it in all kinds of ways. They can do it through meditation. They can do it through prayer. They could do it through a walk in nature. There's so many ways we can do that. And as we start noticing and becoming more aware, then I know that now I'm no longer going to sit on my chair hunching down. I'm going to keep my posture up here. And this is the habit now I'm starting to observe. So every time I'm hunching, I know, and I say, all right, I'm going to self-correct now. I'm going to sit up and straight.
And then so I actually have a practice, centering practice. It's a little bit slightly different than that, but very similar.
Sure.
So how were you able to get the leaders to, I assume the intention is to be centered throughout the entire day. And the hard thing is, for example, I was on the phone with AT&T. God bless them. I've been on the phone probably 5 hours with AT&T over and over again, doing the same correcting thing that I feel like I suspended my service, but I didn't. And they call it. I mean, it's just been horrific. And when I do that, it's like my heart is just like, boom, close. And I'm trying. But, so there are times throughout the day where, if I'm doing a radio show, if I'm coaching with clients, it's like it just, I've done it for so long that it kind of opens up. But what I find is that, afterwards, I'll be taking this show and creating a Final Cut Pro on YouTube, and it's just kind of like my heart is just like, get back to the task and put the head down. And so what are some of the tips that you have for people who who care about leadership, would like to be centered and coming from a place of presence and groundedness versus kind of, how do they remember to do that?
Remember to remember. So there's different ways we can do that, and we can all set our own reminders to do it, from ways in which we post a quote somewhere in your office that will remind you to take you to centering immediately. Like I have a picture of my son. As long as the moment I look at him, then I shift immediately, and we don't have to take life so seriously. There is laughter to it. There is a lightheartedness to it.
Yes.
There is.
I'll show you mine. This is what's at the side of my.
Yeah, well, I'll show you. There is Hadrian. There you go. So,
there we go.
So that's for me a way to ground.
Yeah.
And then I have my plants. For me, keeping plants, again, I have my plant here on the desk, and it's called, I give them names, joy, because it reminds me that this is about joy. If I'm going to stress myself out through the entire day and I'm not being joyful about it, what's the point? I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to feel exhausted. We've got two types of leaders if we want to categorize it, the conscious and the unconscious. The conscious, and both of them can get things done. But at the end of the day, the conscious leader is more relaxed, is more in peace. The unconscious leader goes home and it's collapsing and it's exhausted and it's feeling busy. It's something about the word busy that we hear so often in our society this day. And I remember looking it up, and it's actually busy means anxiety. So when you're responding to somebody, I'm doing well, but busy, it's been busy. We're actually saying we're anxious, and we are anxious. I mean, there's a lot of anxiety going on in our system right now. But to go back to your question, the other way that I center myself back in the middle of whatever is going on is I try to get out of my own head or get out of my own way. And the way to do that is to notice that you're in the middle of it. I'm doing that again. I understand I'm talking to the AT&T person and I'm really getting to the point of frustration and I need to take a new stance around it. So I will just shift the view and try to find a way to move out of it. And to do that is generally a creative process. And the creative process could simply be, I'm just paying attention to the window outside my
Mm-hmm.
office
Mm-hmm.
because I'm noticing something very different. We need to trust the wisdom that is all around us. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much wisdom around us that goes beyond what we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a coworker next door, whether it's the plant here right in my desk,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's just noticing and being open to notice something new because the answer is going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so getting out of your own head, and I think to wrap that up, at the foundation of it is really accepting the practice of active imagination, which is connecting with our inner child, connecting with our aliveness. What
Mm-hmm.
brings us joy at every moment in life?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So we were talking
yeah,
about that what brought you into this leadership program, creating this leadership program, started off with an embodiment centering program of which you just stepped us through. And one of the
yeah,
hardest things I think once you go down that path is probably continuing to be centered, of which you gave us a bunch of ideas. You also, and then I have one quick question about centering, and then I want to talk about the coaching piece.
sure.
You said that people were coming to you because I presume that they found results. You said overall what they were feeling is more holistic with the program. But what were the other results just for the centering alone? What were the results that had people knocking on your door saying, I want whatever that person's having?
Well, they were literally cultivating their voice in a new way, whether it's internally in the organization. Um, they were
You mean the
finding it,
leaders and their employees, or who are the people who are cultivating their voices, or
the
everyone?
leaders, the
Ah,
leaders in the organization.
okay.
They were cultivating more their voice. And I think, see, to me, because the distinction you just made, leaders or employees, I think so. There is senior leadership, and
Mm-hmm.
then there is mid-level leaders. But the way I guess I'm using the term leader now could be anyone in the organization, leading
Okay.
from any place.
Okay.
But there were both, I would say, at different levels, senior leaders and mid-level leaders. We have particularly through this program, we run an executive leadership program with DC government.
Mm-hmm.
And through that program, this is now, we just finished cohort number 5. And through that program, they would go through an intense coaching practice, intense peer coaching circles. This is another opportunity where they get with peers. And when they come through at the end of the program, the kinds of experiences that they share are about them being now more intentional with their own leaders, knowing how to ask better questions,
Mm-hmm.
knowing when to step away when they needed to step away, trust more,
Mm-hmm.
foster more collaboration in a way that it's not just for the sake of collaboration, getting to see their people in a new light in the way that they never saw before. So they fostered better connection. They were able to, just because they got more clear, they're able to connect more and start mentoring other people, developing more intentionally other people, and delegating better.
Right.
So all this as a result of cultivating your
Wow.
own inner knowing, right?
Right.
Your own presence, your own presence
I
as a
see.
leader.
So they became more conscious of themselves and
Yeah.
how they behaved and felt during certain situations. Which, okay, I'm talking to my boss. What
Mhm.
are the questions I'd like to ask that I
Yeah.
truly want to ask, or
Yeah.
how am I going to connect with this person? Really seeing that person versus kind of
Right.
manipulating that person to whatever I
Right.
want.
Absolutely.
I see. So they had those results. They came to you and said, "Great, so you did this program, and then you're telling me about coaching, which is like the next addition to
Yeah.
it." And you said when coaching met presence, it was like a. So what was it about coaching? What element about coaching added to the program, and what? So just for people who are not familiar,
Yeah.
coaching at the International Coaching Federation has a program that they require you to go through teaching you base level coaching skills, listening, proactive listening,
Hmm.
asking really good questions, various tools and techniques to elicit someone's inner knowing and inner wisdom. So when you started teaching those kinds of tools, or I don't know if that's how you would describe what coaching is. What?
No, that's very good. Yeah. I mean, the International Coaching Federation is kind of the regulatory body for coaching, but it's important that coaching is about a partnership between a leader and a coach that generates creative conversations that allow the leader in a safe space to come up with their own answers for whatever solution and outcomes they want to create. So it's a professional relationship, and it's a one-on-one generally, and could be done in teams, could be done in groups. When I said we started incorporating coaching in this program, it was the one-on-one coaching and the peer coaching. That's what we were incorporating in most of our programs.
Right.
And we would start, I remember, because it wasn't an easy sell in the beginning, with 3 hours. And then we moved a lot of our programs to 8 hours to 12 hours, which is fantastic. And you want to see some results over time. But sometimes it takes an hour for a person to have an insight and an opening.
Right.
So that really, I think what happened with that is, one, most of our coaches do come to the partnership with this higher level of awareness and bringing the whole person perspective in the conversation. And of course, you meet the client where the client needs to be met, but they come with that perspective. So just that modeling that way of being elevated the leader's way of being and being in that conversation. And then, of course, having this very one-on-one time to do reflection, thinking, engage in practices, new behaviors, new ways of being. It really customized it and made it very focused for the leaders to work exactly in the areas that they needed to work. So it really accelerated things in their journey. Training is always a great approach because you can learn from the community, but you have to also have this individualized approach, and coaching can do that for you.
Okay, so the results that you got were that they were able to really work one-on-one with their, so a coach, which is the boss, would work with employee, which you're describing as the leader. Is that right? And so they would work together, and they had they were able to come up with better questions. They were able to customize their work and see the person holistically. What were some of the outcomes? Because I think that, usually it's like, what was productivity like? Did they get up more reports? Was it more kind of a better work environment? What were some of the outcomes that you got from the coaching piece?
Well, I think I think part of it, the centering was part of the coaching and part of the training. So some of what I was mentioning earlier was also part of it.
Okay, so those
it's
are
also
the
part
kind
of
of
a similar
benefits.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we've heard things like, and it's hard. This is the other thing. It's really hard to measure. This is one of the things a lot of organizations are working to measure the ROI on, particularly with coaching. So a lot of it's anecdotal, or maybe some level 2 or 3, what are you doing different? But we had one woman who came one day and she said, this is the best because I've been stuck with this issue forever. I feel so liberated. I'm actually going to leave the government and it's okay. And this program helped me do that. So sometimes it goes in the direction maybe the employer doesn't want it to go.
Yeah.
Or somebody else who came and said, I want this program not just for the senior leaders. I want this to go for the whole organization. I want people to learn how they can be more creative, less reactive. I feel this is the most important thing we can do in our city. And she was coming also from the HR part of things. So it was like, great, you get it.
Yeah.
So we get things of that kind. And then, of course, sometimes we hear from maybe the supervisor of that person who says, I can't believe how this person's transformed the work is doing with their team and just changed the way It's changed the culture around our team, teamwork, etc. So there's things of that kind. Um, and we do get, at the end of most of our programs, we get people to do a reflection on their journey.
Yeah.
And it's a journey of tears, and it's a journey of celebration. Um, Everybody is touched in their heart. And I think if we can all touch our humanity's heart at a massive level, I think we would create a different level of thriving in our planet, really, right now, in organizations, but in the world. So,
All right. You were talking about the conscious leadership is getting clear intentions with the work that you're doing. It also means co-creating with other people. So it's about the energy. The E is the energy and expanding and of the heart of this, of which I think you were talking about, and the co-creating is the coaching and the kind of one-on-one interaction. So that's kind of the basis,
yeah,
and the intention, the vision that I think I'm hearing you say is to actually bring some more joy and humanity, more freedom, more
yeah,
joy, just a better world. It's a different way for creating a better world. It's in changing each individually and therefore creating better organizations, individual happiness. Is that the vision, or what's the vision for your
that's
program?
perfect. Yeah, no, you said it in a really beautiful way. The vision is to cultivate this energetic stability in our lives and in the world and in organizations in a way that we tap more intentionally into our collective wisdom as a
Mm-hmm.
humanity
Mm-hmm.
and act from that with intention so that we can cultivate this thriving. We
Mm.
can cultivate this voice that we've been saying in the language of one humanity. See each other. I see you into me. This is how we build the intimacy, the connection,
Mm-hmm.
that we are the one humanity. The other thing is, in this program, we look at looking at coaching as a way of being with this tool set.
Mm-hmm.
We also look at coaching as a way, or the coach as a way of being a catalyst for social change. The more you cultivate your inner work, the more you're going to have a capacity to generate or create change in your community, in your organization. And the coach is a global citizen because we want to generate a global awareness,
Mm-hmm.
which goes back to the platform on sustainable development goals. I mean, we're in a crisis in humanity right now, a leadership crisis and all kinds of crisis. So we need to cultivate
All right,
more of
and
that.
I wasn't, you had mentioned this earlier in the program, but there is some agency, I guess, that came up with some global initiatives. Is that right? And what was that agency, and what was the initiatives that they came up with? And can you kind of give us an example of one so we know?
Oh, I think what I was talking about in relation to that is there is a second part of our program that it's called the One Humanity Lab. And the
Okay.
One Humanity Lab, it's an incubator. It's an opportunity for an organization to come in, work with us on an issue that has a global importance, and it may be local for where they're operating. And we're looking at developing it around three issue areas, or which align to the three sustainable development goals. One being education, the second being health and well-being, and the third being climate action. So
Okay.
these are three of the areas that we're looking to develop. We have not yet fully developed it, but we're at that process of soliciting partners,
And
etc.
is this sustainable development goals ones for the program that you created, or are they like some other goal that? the
This
World
is,
Health Organization
yeah,
created. Like I'm not.
no, no, yeah, no, we didn't invent it. So the Sustainable Development Goals is the United Nations Global Platform for Action.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't
there's
note that.
17 of them. That's all right. That's 17 of them. And and then we've chosen three of those to focus on.
Okay, so a nonprofit or an NGO who's focusing on these three, education, health and wellness, climate action, would
Mhm.
come in and then get help through
Yeah.
through some of the coaches. And so the relationship would be the coach would be working with some of the managers in their group to help you and apply the coaching techniques of
Mhm.
presence and grounding as well as some of the traditional
Yeah.
coaching things.
Yeah,
Got it.
it's a combination. It's the coaching component, and there is a little bit of a training component. It's we work with something we call wisdom circles, which is a way to incubate change using the power of the group. So there is different variations of coaching, different experiments in between. It's a 5-month program.
Hmm.
It's a great opportunity for an organization who has a question or a challenge to work with us in that way. And it's wonderful for the community of coaches that we're cultivating and building to contribute, because the people who want to go to this program, people who really have a critical question in mind they want to solve that has some kind of a social value, some
Hmm.
sort of a social impact.
Hmm.
So it becomes kind of um, um, it becomes a great opportunity for both the coaches in training and an organization who needs help and support.
Yeah, that's great. It's a win-win for
Yeah.
both. All right.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so I want to talk now that we've talked a little bit about the program, which is
Mm.
starting in January 2020, and is also available for any person who signs up who's been a leader. You have to actually be and been in a leadership role for 5 years or more, but they can go and sign up for this program, this coaching program. And find out about the fees, and we've talked about the kind of components of it. What I want to talk about in the next 10 minutes is just what you're finding in leadership. I mean, how you had said that, people, what are you finding is the current state of leadership that makes some of this so important?
Yeah. Well, the biggest buzzword that when you come in an organization, I'm going to talk from the organizational perspective. Um, the biggest thing that you hear is employee engagement.
Right,
Employees are not engaged. You've got, the whole Gallup survey. The data
right.
says that 70% of the Americans' workforce is not engaged.
Hmm.
Um, why is that happening? So that's one of the entry points or one of the concerns that leaders bring up.
Right, and I actually let me just
Yeah,
interject, and the
sure.
seven what that is actually correlated to productivity. So when you have not people who are not engaged, it also means that they're not productive, and there's also higher it's harder to retain them because they're not engaged. Okay, so just
Absolutely.
that's what I
No,
know about the couple. So
that's
that's
great.
basically okay. So that's a Gallup poll, and then
That's
sorry.
the one. That's one thing that comes up when we get in touch with a client. The
Okay.
other one is generally around change management.
Mm-hmm.
There's some change going on, whether it's a merger or whether there is a new leader coming on board or a new. I mentioned earlier we do a lot of with DC government. The politics. The
Right.
mayor may change every 4 years, so there's always the change, something changing in the system. That's the second point of entry. Then sometimes is about I want to, we want to create, there are some leaders who come from a perspective, want to create a more collaborative workforce or more accountable workforce. Accountability and collaboration are also things that people bring up that want to address.
Hmm.
So these are some kinds of the um, themes that I've observed when we come in touch with leaders. Oh, and there's a lot around succession planning as well, especially in government. The next, um, it's a big percentage of government leaders that is retiring, and it's
Wow. Yeah.
how are we going to create that sustainability or the succession planning? So that's the major. Those are sort of the entry points I've noticed. And when you engage in conversations and you start trying to map out a plan or what can you do from here, it always comes down to self-awareness, as as easy as it sounds. And again, I'll go back into the inner journey. Generally, you'll start with the senior leadership because that's the vision that's going to move the organization forward. Then you move to mid-level, and then you move to frontline. Frontline is the one that tends not to get a lot of attention. That's where I would love for us to do more. In fact, with this program, the way we're working is we're targeting several government agencies that do not have a chance to offer coaching to frontline, and have our coaches in training do that as a service and provide that opportunity. So I think that becomes sort of then the conversation, to move people to move the organization into a new direction.
And what are the objections that you generally hear? So people, there are these buzzwords, right? Like HR
Yeah,
people are, they read a report from Gallup and they read this report and they're like, bombarded with vendors who have engagement programs and
yeah.
change management programs and such. I mean, what 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 are the obstacles to even getting an organization? So you have people who are kind of like going in, and generally what I've noticed is some HR person, it's not necessarily a senior leader. So you go
hmm
to a senior leader and you try to convince them that this is actually something that they need. What do you see as the misunderstandings or misconceptions or confusion that people generally have?
So it depends on the situation, but I think generally what happens is we try to come, we're very good listeners, and I think that's really a capacity we need to develop more. And the listening allows for the trust building. I think that's really the first step to kind of allow and build a safe space also for the conversation to happen.
Hmm.
That's the first step. Then the second thing to it is to really, because we're listening, is to make sure we're meeting the leaders where they are.
Hmm.
And at times you have to give a little bit of a push
Hmm.
because it may not always be what they really thought they wanted,
Right.
but it's meeting them when they are, designing something that will appeal to their hope and aspiration.
Hmm.
And then once you're in, there's a lot of flexibility what you can do.
Right. I see. So you're just
Because
basically addressing their business need and then saying, okay, um, now you have a business need of change management.
mhm,
One of the things we find is presence is really important during that time. Here's the
yeah,
presence. Here's the key thing. You need a center because these
yeah.
things are generally important, whether
Sometimes we
you're
don't even,
regardless. Yeah.
yeah, sometimes we don't even talk about that. We just talk about, and it's always helpful to quote science or quote some big university. I mean, we're a pretty big university, but sometimes it's good to address some Harvard professor or an MIT professor,
Right. Throw those
something
out.
like
Yeah.
that. But it
Gallup.
it it really does help. Or bring sometimes an article that you think it's going to connect with them and has some. So, and this really comes from the need of wanting to feel safe.
Hmm.
So if we could come with that, as you meet this human being, whether it's a senior leader or the HR person, The intention is to make this person feel safe and feel heard. And as you move into that space, because we want to help, we want to give you some, we want to help, we want to support. So meet them with their languages, offer some solutions that create an opening. And then when you're in the space doing the work, you can probe deeper. You can really go deeper. We don't go and say there's a centering practice we want to offer to you. Unless an organization is very intentional and says, oh, we want to do executive presence, or we want to do a program on well-being. It's a different take. But if they want to do change management, we don't start with that.
Right.
You know, we talk about a Kolb experiential model, you know, and we say we introduce a concept, we test it, we reflect, and then we move on. So there's different ways you can talk about.
You can frame it up in an academic way so that they don't get kind of scared or freaked out.
This is what we know. This is what we know. I mean, this is the kind of education system we've grown up to appreciate what we can really see, to appreciate the facts and what we think is the truth and know for true to be the truth. So,
and how does it work taking someone who's kind of, you know, someone who's like, what's this breathing centering thing? You know, what do they, oh my gosh, I only have 6 more seconds. Darn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do I have, no, I have 7 more minutes. Sorry. So, good. Yes. So tell me a little bit about, you know, what is their, you know, because this is kind of, you know, if someone, like you said, like yourself, and like I started off when I was doing my practice, I was completely in my head. So if someone said, feel the breath in your body, I'd be like, what do you even mean? You know,
Exactly.
So, you know, and that's where I assume that where you're meeting most of the people. So how do you get them to this point?
Well, we use an interesting analogy because we know that happens. We bring it up in the beginning, we bring it up at the end. We talk, we're going to face resistance. There's the inner resistance because newness is just like change management. There's going to be resistance. But we invite you in the practice of resistance to step into it.
Yeah.
And stepping into resistance is like the coal, the diamond that becomes coal. Diamond under pressure, under resistance becomes coal. Coal
diamond.
Under pressure, under resistance becomes the diamond.
Yeah.
So it's a practice. We emphasize the practice, and it's an invitation. It's really an invitation, and sometimes people are gonna make the choice not to engage. But I also think, because most of this is working with groups, it's about engaging the collective. We go back to the collective. When we're all taking a couple of breaths, we're building a container of the collective.
I see, because you're not coaching one person one-on-one. You have a group of like 12 that you're teaching about the centering. So that's kind of, they get support from their peers who are doing similar things.
When you're introducing it that way. Now, if you're introducing the coaching one-on-one, it's a different story. I mean, that in that sense, it's really the ability of the coach to meet the client where they are. Maybe the client is not ready for that yet.
Yeah.
It's going to take its own time. You're not just jumping in your first session and you're doing breathing if your client isn't there. So I think it's divine timing, I would say.
Right.
It's really divine timing, or auspicious timing may be a better word in this case. Yeah.
No, I think one of the things that they've said in mediation, which I've been trained as a mediator, is that someone has to be open and willing to change. And if someone is not open and willing to change, you can't mediate. You also cannot coach. You can't do much of anything if people aren't open or willing. I've seen it over and over as a coach myself. If you don't have someone who is open and willing to change themselves, their attitude or whatever, it's not going to happen. So, and I would assume, like, you know, if I were to think of probably who, I've actually worked with the National Park Service, and those people are like pretty open-minded because they're like out in nature and they they love the environment. So it's it was pretty easy to have them practice some of the techniques that I have, but
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that, and I worked with a bunch of attorneys for that.
Mm.
So they were like super, you know,
Titan. Yeah.
yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
they're in their heads, they're in an
Yeah.
intellectual pursuit. And
Yeah.
so I was just wondering what kinds of things you've encountered and how you deal with them. But um, so the consciousness, I mean, once people go through this program, and you're looking at conscious leadership, I mean, where do you think this can go beyond where it's going right now? I mean,
So my practice is to let go. I could see it. We use the dandelion as one of the visuals, visual representations of the programs, and the intention for it is to make that wish, to blow the seeds, and allow them to land um, wherever they will find the ripe land to land.
hmm
Now, we do want that by year 2030, we have we've trained a coach in every member nation of the UN in the world. Well, let's say every country in the world. That's
hmm
kind of our declaration to the universe.
yeah,
But would love, I would love to see this spread in just the way the dandelion spreads. And the dandelion is wild. It will grow in every garden. It will grow and needs very little to grow because it has this inner capacity that it's in the capacity of the seed,
mm,
and it lives in every continent of the world.
mm,
So my wish is for this work to grow in a global level. My wish for it is to cultivate compassion and wonder, and allow people to really step into that practice of active imagination,
mm,
um, and allow to live in flow and and at ease, and be at ease and joy. Just
mm.
step into the joy. Um,
Would you have ever imagined the former you before you did coaching with the same idea, or like how did you even get here?
well, I was a lawyer, so I
Okay.
was that person. I did political campaigning, and then I did some nonprofit work. This is back in my home country in Albania. Then I came here. I wanted to run campaigns, and stepped into learning and development by accident, literally because I needed a job while I was doing school here.
Yeah.
And I started loving it. But I always knew there was something. I've always been a seeker, someone that wants to see things in a new light, perspective. And I was always curious. I always wanted to know. I had the fortune to work with a leadership coach very early on in my grad studies. And I didn't know what a leadership coach was. But then I recalled an earlier event in my life when my mother had hired this English teacher to do private courses for me and my sister. And he would come with this pre-designed programs. And the first class he ever taught us was to take a look at our VIPs, which were values, interests, personality, and skills.
Mm,
So it sounded so unusual at that time because these
mm,
weren't tools we would use in learning. But I could see how some of that also had encouraged me to do and to
mm.
be developing those critical thinking skills. And I think that's the kind of work we need to do more with our children and with our schools.
Yeah. That's great.
Um, so that's kind of how I
Okay.
stepped into it. But
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So tell me a little bit about your website. So it's Eco Leadership, and how do people find you if they would like to sign up for the class?
Yeah, so they can go to leadershipcoaching.cpl.gw.edu, or they
Okay.
can simple Google George Washington University Leadership Coaching.
Okay, cool. And then they
And
can find it
yeah,
that way and sign
yeah,
up
they can find it that way.
January, so they have some time to do it. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. This is so interesting.
Thank you very much.